topic. Should the Breeze topic number 2 says, see what happens when we stay away from our indigenous ways. Why do we have immediate doubt of our ways of knowing, but have automatic faith in Western ways of knowing? This came with a link that's taken us to Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter. There's this tweet here from William Horn. It says, Ghana has lost yet another historic and cultural landmark due to neglect. The ancient mud mosque at Bole has collapsed. Torrential rains are being blamed, but 5 years ago, I visited it and wrote an article documenting visible termite infestations in its rafters. I'm not going to read the old document, but I'll share some of the pictures here. So this is September 2023, Bole Mosque, Upper West Region, Ghana. By the way, the background of this picture looks like some areas I grew up in and around in Nassau, by the way. So here's a 2018 photo of the rafters of the mosque. And you can see there's damage going on here. 2018, this is what the mosque looked like at the time. 2018, these are the rafters, so you can see where there's damage yet again. So that's the end of the pictures. Let me see if this was a thread or not. Yeah, William goes on to say, it seems lessons were not learned from the Larabanga Mosque collapse, which was due to replacing traditional mud plaster with cement. Cement is waterproof and traps moisture in the mud walls, causing wood beams to rot and enticing termites to enter. Bole was using cement plaster. All right. He said when he visited in 2018, the floors had just been covered with modern tiles, but the ceiling rafters were left rotting. It was a waste of money on a shiny surface improvement. So, I saw this on Twitter maybe last week or earlier this week. And the idea, and what was crazy was a Nigerian woman came along and said something along the lines of, and Africans will complain about the shit that the Europeans basically stole and threw in their museums. She said, when it comes to our artifacts, we might as well just give it to the white man to take care of. He'll do a better job. Does anyone here really believe in something like that? But as you see, should be topic number 2, what happens when we stay away from our indigenous ways? Why do we have immediate doubt of our ways of knowing, but have automatic faith in Western ways of knowing? Let me start with Brother Bakari. Brother Bakari, what say you?
I'm not sure if this have anything to do with indigenous ways. I don't know exactly. It's just indigenous ways of building stuff. I don't know. Maybe you stay away. Maybe they stay away from the indigenous ways because the indigenous ways got their ass kicked by the Western ways. I'm just being honest with you. I truly don't know. Like, I think you can learn something from if they're doing something. Excuse me, and it's good. You take it and learn it. I think it's cool to learn, but I don't know. I don't know if as I was watching this shit, using that background, Nassau, man, that looked like my hometown, Glen Island, Mississippi. That looked like Progress Village. But anyway, man, I have no idea. Your indigenous ways was shit. I would say run out of you by fear. So that's why it's easy to accept the conquered. Always accept the conquerors. Always accept the conqueror's way. That's just how it is. Shit, go back. You can throughout history and time. Once they conquer you physically, they conquer you mentally, they conquer you in every way. So if you're a completely conquered people, you tend to follow the conquerors, I guess.
I appreciate that, Bakari. Afro Native World in the chat said to me about this prompt is exactly what Aya Tanzania is working to resolve. Restore faith in indigenous ways of the people in Tanzania. He says that worked instead of the Western ones that were adopted. Real quick, Trigger Happy says, Obadale Cameron's institution, I think, is built by mud. Lots of architecture now seems to have this idea of the superiority of concrete. Trigger Happy 262 Plus says, this is a very important topic, by the way, because we seem to think that our indigenous knowledge systems are incompatible now. We can mold and develop as we add new forms of technology. Black Steel, you heard everything Brother Bakari had to say in the chat. What say you?
So, looking at this situation, this mosque has been around since the 17th century, it looks like. So, I'm wondering, they say it was neglect, but I do know it does require some funds to manage and upkeep these type of historical structures. You have to spray for termites, reinforce the structure. So, I'm wondering, just was it so much an issue of will versus skill? Not that they didn't know how to do it, they just didn't want to devote the funds and the time to do that. And this is of course they said this building is a mosque, which is Muslim house of worship, but it was made in a traditional African style of architecture. So I think that you know I'm wondering if maybe it was just a matter of the people of Ghana did not have the funds to rebuild the structure, or was it just that they just were not interested? It's hard to me to kind of wrap my head around something. You have historical landmarks all over the world, and it does take some level of upkeep and time and things like that to kind of keep these buildings pristine. So I think that saying that did we steer away from our indigenous ways? Yeah, I think so. That's definitely true because in many cases, African people, they're taught to look down on their indigenous ways. And I'm gonna give you an example. Um, I know everybody's familiar. I don't know if you're familiar with the singer Tim's. Uh, she's Nigerian, and apparently she made a post about her walking on water, and somebody made the comparison that she looked like Yamaya, the Orisha. And she made it known, no, 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 no. I'm Jesus walking on water. So when someone made an allusion to her looking like something that came from Africa, she felt the need to correct that and like, no, no, no. I'm a Christian. So many times we look back on what Africa is doing, and we look at it as if it's inferior in a way. So we tend to discard and put aside the way things are done, even though many times what African people did was superior. Not just what African people did, what indigenous people did across the world was superior to what was done by the European. They come in with their knowledge thinking everything is good and everything is okay, but then white people fuck up the shit. I'll give you an example. In Australia, they're having these massive wildfires. Now, for some reason, the people in Australia could live for thousands of years and not have that type of difference because they lived in connection with the land. They knew where to live and where to grow their crops or whatnot. White people show up 200 years later, the whole goddamn continent's a tinderbox. The same thing in America. The same thing in Africa. We disregard what we were taught, what our history and everything else like that, and like we accept a European worldview. So I don't know what's going to happen with the structure, if it can be rebuilt. Maybe they can reinforce it with something a little bit more sturdy. But I don't think we should get away from what our ancestors learned. And many of us, because we live in diaspora and we don't have really a connection the way we should have. So that involves a little bit of legwork on our parts because we don't have that authentic connection because we did grow up in a white dominated society. So it takes a lot. There's a lot of things we have to unlearn many times when we're on our journeys. So I'll leave it there. I said a lot. I'll let Juan speak. Thank you, Copley.
Thank you, Carl, for that. Trigabi 262 Plus said he saw that thing with Thames, by the way. He said that's exactly why he goes hard for African spirituality. Buana, you heard everything everyone had to say and say in the chat. We'll say you to all of it.
Yeah. First, let me say, not because it's not because you are continental African that I what you say is valid to me personally to me because I don't have to be in Africa, be born on the continent of Africa to be African minded. Nor would I say or even suggest because you was born in Africa on the continent of Africa that you are African minded. So this whole thing with this Tim's character, this Tim's lady, I think that's the same sister who was singing for King Charles for his installation. I think that's the same sister who was on the platform singing for the installation of King Charles to run the the Nigeria territory. So this when people refer to her and say you look like Yemi walking on water, and she said, "Well, I'm a Christian or whatever," I really didn't discount her. Words from her is almost like words from Beyonce to me. They mean nothing. They mean absolutely nothing. She just, for me, she just a prima donna out here selling her music for a couple of dollars. You know what I mean? So I dismiss her right off of the bat. Right off of the bat. Nigeria, no. But in terms of this, when we talk about indigenous cultures in Africa, this is a mosque. Is a mosque indigenous to Africa because it was there hundreds and hundreds of years ago? I don't know. I question that because I don't think a mosque is indigenous to Africa at all. No way. I don't think a mosque is indigenous to Africa. That's not indigenous. That's not an indigenous spiritual aspect of African culture at all. At all. So what I always say, maybe they should have built with stone because it seems to me like in Egypt, them stone monuments that they built thousands of years ago don't have a problem with the same problem that they have in this particular area. Maybe they should have built with stone. Who knows? You know. But in terms of indigenous culture, maybe they should go the way of Rome because this don't need to be in Africa no more. It's too much Christianity. It's too much Islam in an African continent, and we need to do away with that. So I don't mind it becoming eaten up by termites and rotten mold. So you really coming to me. You shouldn't come to me with this kind of question. But needless to say, I think that with these kinds of questions, maybe you could simplify it because there's maybe some misunderstandings with the questions itself, and I think that maybe if you dumb it down a little bit, I'll be able to understand it better. Maybe. But I would suggest that this is not indigenous African culture. I don't want it, and it don't need to be there. So if it fall down in the sun, I don't mind that. That's not a problem for me. What needs to come out of that is something that is authentically African. Because this is not authentically African culture. I don't want it. I don't want it. I'll stop there.
So
So let me
even
ask
though I'm sorry,
you.
even though the religion of Islam might not be authentically African, I do think that they made this mosque in an African style. So the architectural technique used to build the mosque was African. Um, Even though we may not agree with necessarily their beliefs, and that's fine. But I do think it is a marvel of architecture for a structure made with mud and wood to last for so long. And also, it says in the post about the torrential rains are being blamed for this. So again, I mean, I'm gonna beat this drum till y'all get sick of it. Climate change is real, y'all. So who said? And I know that it wasn't just the rains, but I think the rains, in addition to the termite damage, was the final nail in the coffin for this structure. So we just gotta be aware. I'll leave it there.
Hey,
But
so let me ask, right? So not as, like we always say African spiritual systems, right? And I watched this documentary on Queen Amina from Nigeria, right? They were going to war. They were literally going out praying and thought their praying to their African gods was going to stop bullets from killing them. Of course, we know that didn't work. So, which African spiritual system? I believe this is just my take. I think we concern ourselves too much with spiritual when it comes to whatever kind of what and not focus on the physical. I'm not saying don't use an African spiritual system, but what I'm saying which one? Because that one Queen Amina them was using. I don't want to use that one because I ain't gonna pray to nobody and say I have prayed to Ogun or whoever, and it's gonna make me so tough where a bullet ain't gonna pierce my skin. Let's go to war with guns. They got guns, but we can use spears and knives. I ain't gonna use that spiritual system right there. So which spiritual system? I'm just saying. And when I say this, it offends people. But I'm asking the question, and I'm serious. See, when we talk about spiritual system, and the reason I mentioned like Queen Amina, and when I'm watching that documentary and that movie, only thing we did, believe it or not, we just replaced an African God because we believe the same way with the name Jesus. When I saw people praying that a bullet don't pierce their skin, yeah, we forgot about the name of those African gods, but we pray like the same way. Let's pray and hope a bullet don't pierce our skin. Let's get on our knees and pray that these people don't come set this thing on fire. And neither one of it worked. So I'm just asking,
Brother
which
Bakari, Brother Bakari, keep your powder dry. I build into something, and I waiting for Koku to bring up the prompt, but I build into something. It's intentional. Just keep your powder dry. Hold your powder for a minute. Keep it dry for a minute.
Let me ask this, Bakari. How is that any different than what's being done with Christianity? There's people right now who are dancing with snakes because they believe that if they get bit by serpents, they won't die. So to me, I'm gonna say this, I'm keep it real. If you're gonna worship any God, it better be a God who looks like you. Because as we're gonna see later on, that the anti-blackness is so embedded within the Judeo-Christian religions that it'll drive you crazy. So I definitely
but Black Steel, that's what I just said though. I said all they did was replace that with the name Jesus. I was just talking about black folks. I ain't talking about them crazy white folks. I hope all of them dance with a rattlesnake and get bit. In all honesty, I hope all the Indians get bit by the cobras, the East Indians, whatever them damn Indians on the reservation here. That ain't none of my business, right? But what I'm saying is that's why I said they replaced because we forgot the name of the African gods. But what I'm saying is we do it the same way. And what I was saying, so praying to any god, going to war is the point that I made, and people like to skip that point. If you pray to a god that my prayer is going to protect me from a bullet, that's a spiritual system. I don't care whose it is or what the god is named. That's a spiritual system I don't want because I know that ain't gonna happen. I
that's
know I
true, but that's a bit of an extreme example though, because I mean that's a bit extreme because let's be honest, before you go to war with anybody, you gotta have the right ideology. And if you don't have an ideology, then you can be if you're not centered internally, then you're not going to be able to overcome what African people have always been, because we don't have the ideology, because we lost our culture. So we have black people going all over the world asking for forgiveness, asking for redemption from sin, but we're not minded because we lost that connection. And I understand what Trigger Happy trying to say is that we've lost that connection to our roots. And as long as we're without that connection, even though you necessarily got to be, believing in bullets come bounce off of you, but the first weapon that the European always comes with is their missionaries first. They come with the missionaries because they need to separate you from your African culture, your spirituality. That's the first thing they do. So now that we know that weapon is being used against us, okay, yeah, we know that it's not going to block bullets, but what can it do? Let's focus on what it can do versus on what it can't do. I'll leave it there.
So let me ask a question, right? Because I know we focus on the spiritual. I focus more on the physical. I'm just being honest with you, and I ain't telling nobody else what to do but me personally. There wasn't no spirit that kneeled on George Floyd's neck. There wasn't no spirit that shot up in the lady in a house in Kentucky. There wasn't no spirits that's been lynching and raping and robbing. There was not a spirit that put our ancestors on the bottom of a ship. That shit was done physically. I ain't saying don't be spiritual if that's what you are, but I also think we need to start operating in the physical realm, because that was physical what happened in Buffalo. That was physical what happened in that church in South Carolina. That was physical what happened to that dude down there in Mississippi. You understand? That was physical what them Italians did in Brooklyn, New York, back in the late 80s, early 90s. All that was physical. We operate in the spiritual. But I ain't never seen none of these spirits really do nothing to nobody unless you using your spirit to make you go to war.
Let me say this, Bakari. In every situation that you just mentioned, what happened afterwards? Those black people who were survivors of these attacks, they forgave these white people. I'm a Christian, so I must forgive, right? So whenever what happened in Buffalo, what happened in Charleston, black people was knocking down their doors to forgive these murderous crackers.
Okay. They didn't forgive in Buffalo like that.
There's plenty of, now I saw the video. There was plenty of old black women praying and saying they forgave these people for killing their family. What's the one cracker? The one who went to the church. They was forgiving him before he got sentenced. Oh, we forgive them because we're Christians. We forgive them because we forgive. So the spirituality has set black people up to seek justice in the hereafter. So to your point, you're right, because these things are happening in the material world, but maybe we need something more in the spirit to help us get on track where we can understand that we are at war and stop forgiving the people who don't even ask for forgiveness in the first place.
Okay, so I got an idea. So all the people that need their spirits to get right so they can be prepared to fight, when y'all get y'all spirit right, give me a call. I don't need that. I already see my spirit and already told me that what we supposed to do. And dude, Cam J, I don't know how I said it. I might have said it right, said it wrong. We put everything on Christians, but those wouldn't just Christians, atheists, they ain't doing nothing for the most part. Muslims, it's black people. And all of these black people, even the atheists, all of them gonna talk about some spirit or something that they believe and don't believe, instead of understanding maybe I need to look at me, because it's some physical stuff that's happening to my people that the spirits ain't coming down and stopping. And me personally, this is me, and I ain't trying to offend nobody. When I hear people constantly talk about the spirit gonna make them fight, or they need the spirit, I think those people really don't want to fight. I'm just being honest. Because if they're waiting on the right spirit in every black person to get on some type of African spiritual system, that ain't gonna happen. That is really truly not gonna happen. I'm just being honest.
I don't think it's gonna happen. But again, look, to my point, I believe that when we accept a Eurocentric, and I'm gonna say Judeo-Christian, and that includes when we accept these type of belief systems, it already primes us to be susceptible to the types of violence you're talking about, because it teaches us meekness, it teaches us to forgive, it teaches our rewards are in the hereafter. What they say in the Bible, store not up your treasures, your treasures are stored in heaven. So I believe that when we follow these religious beliefs, it almost sets us up to be taken advantage of. So if we and somebody in the chat mentioned Boukman, who was a Jamaican who came to Haiti, started off the revolution. And Boukman He believed African spiritual system, but he also understood that it was going to take blood and steel to organize and to win their freedom. So I don't think the two are necessarily mutually exclusive, but I will say that adherence to Judeo-Christian beliefs makes us docile, and I believe that's been the way for too long.
So I'm gonna ask a question right quick, then I'm gonna stop. Right? Do y'all believe Jesus is real? That's yes or no. Or you ain't got the answer.
Yes, I do.
Y'all ain't got.
I believe. Okay. I believe that there was a historical Jesus. There was a person who existed. However, I don't believe that all the other stuff about him turning water to wine and whatnot. So I believe Jesus is more of like a historical legend, like Robin Hood or King Arthur. This person may have existed, but the legends and the stories that have built up around this person over the years for so long, they don't have any basis in reality.
So watch this out. So for
the only but
so for people who don't know anything about Jesus, or say Jesus is black, right? So now you ain't worshiping someone that look like a European because you have made him black, and you find a lot of Christians that make him African. And somebody put it in the chat, militant resistance at this point is foolish. So I guess I'm being a fool. But what I'm saying is, it don't make a difference what spiritual system you have. It don't make a damn difference. Man, if you ain't ready to stop people from kneeling on your neck for 11 seconds while you a grown man calling mama, and I ain't saying that to be funny. And if you ain't willing to stop people from walking up in your church to shoot you, walking up in a grocery store, killing them, and they go walking up in the Family Dollar, catching one person cutting heads off, if we ain't willing to do what it takes to stop that, I really don't want. I don't care about what spiritual system they got. I'm being honest. It can be African. It can, like you say, indigenous. I don't care what they want to be or how they gonna be. It don't make a difference if we ain't ready to stop people from killing us. It don't make a difference what spiritual system you got. You just gonna be a dead. We'll just be an oppressed, humiliated people with an African spiritual system. That's my point.
So Brother Bakari asked the question if we believe in a person called Jesus. I know a bunch of people in the Dominican Republic. They call it Jesus. In Mexico, they call him Jesus too. But as far as the Jesus, when you say Mary didn't have she didn't have no male interaction or male sex to bring forth a baby. No human being exists on this planet Earth. None. Where you say that a spirit impregnated her, a spirit now impregnated her, and then she had a human child. That ain't never happening ever. You know what I mean? That's fantasy. That's what I believe. So when if you talking in terms of a Jesus in that regards, ain't no Jesus come to this planet Earth without no human interaction, brother. That is fantasy. The only Jesus or Jesus I know about is in Mexico, and they had a daddy. Somebody sleep with their mother and had sex with her, and then shoot his sperm off into the woman, and then they create a child, and then they name it Jesus or Jesus. As when they anglicize it, they name it Jesus or Jesus in the Spanish way. That's the only Jesus I know about. But as far as this character who used to walk on water and he never and his mother ain't never sleep with no man, that ain't never existed in human history, brother. That's fantasy.
Agreed.
All right, sorry about that. I got interrupted here. What I'll do is let me go to Shoot the Breeze topic number 3. And while actually, is this a video? Let me see. No, it's a tweet. It seems. Let me see if it's a video. This is from Scott Barber. The caption says, "I'm not trying to justify slavery, but I'm going to try to justify slavery." So it's a short video. We'll watch it twice.
misunderstand, not justifying the slavery in the situation, but God, I still believe, used it. And now I'm sure there's a lot of Africans that got the gospel, and they're in heaven right now because they got the gospel. You know, what would be better? For them to have lived their entire life in Africa free, doing their voodoo or whatever, and then dying and going to hell, right? Or what happened? And then they go to heaven. They get the opportunity. Now, again, it doesn't justify it. The ends do not justify the means, but this is how God works. This is what God does in the Bible. And we have black people in here. I don't think any of you guys were ever slaves. I was never a slave. It's like, oh, white privilege. You were never a slave. You were never living during the time, unless you're very old, like 60 or 70 maybe, or 80 years old, you're never even living during the time where segregation was a thing in this country. I mean, what are you crying about? Nothing even happened to you. You're just making up stuff. You can't look at the facts that I was reading and just attribute that to some kind of white privilege. It's not real. Get over it. Quit having all the excuses. Why don't you take some responsibility for your choices? Be content with whatever situation you were born into and make the most of it. God's not limited to your situation. He can do above, what we ask or think. I'm sure there's a lot of Africans that were brought over into slavery, which wasn't right, but they got the gospel when they got here. And you know what? I bet you there's a lot of Africans that if they hadn't have been brought over, not saying it was right, don't misunderstand, not justifying the slavery in the situation, but God, I still believe, used it. And now I'm sure there's a lot of Africans that got the gospel, and they're in heaven right now because they got the gospel. You know, what would be better? For them to have lived their entire life in Africa free, doing their voodoo or whatever, and then dying and going to hell, right? Or what happened? And then they go to heaven. They get the opportunity. Now, again, it doesn't justify it. The ends do not justify the means, but this is how God works. This is what God does in the Bible. And we have black people in here. I don't think any of you guys were ever slaves. I was never a slave. It's like, white privilege. You were never a slave. You were never living during the time, unless you're very old, like 60 or 70 maybe, or 80 years old, you're never even living during the time where segregation was a thing in this country. I mean, what are you crying about? Nothing even happened to you. You're just making up stuff. You can't look at the facts that I was reading and just attribute that to some kind of white privilege. It's not real. Get over it. Quit having all the excuses. Why don't you take some responsibility for your choices? Be content with whatever situation you were born into and make the most of it. God's not limited to your situation. He can do above, what we ask or think.
Yeah, I got to agree with Black Seal in the chat. I